A waitress dropping a tray, a customer roaring. And in the corner, a man in a charcoal gray cashmere sweater cupped in warm light sipping coffee completely still. It was nearly 2 p.m. Sunlight slanting through grime-specked windows. The diner walls, once cream, now glare yellow under neon. The kind of place where the same songs play on repeat and grease lamps flicker like tired eyes. People speak over clattering dishes. Steam from the grill curls toward the ceiling. It smells like burnt bacon and old dreams. Esther knew this scene by heart. She'd memorized every crack in the vinyl booth, every chipped tile, every awkward angle between booth and counter that made her trip more times than she could count. She knew the sound of the coffee machine hiss the squeak of the grill spatula the way customers sigh when their sandwich comes a second too late. Today was no different. Until it was. Henderson was screaming again, his steak not medium rare enough, allegedly. He jerked his wrist. He demanded bottled water because this municipal crap tastes like old pipes. His date hovered, embarrassed. The host tried to smooth it over. "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." A well-rehearsed dance. The waitress spilled a drop of soup near his shoes. Henderson glared. Esther twisted her lips. She'd had enough of his voice carving into her day, but something else crept in. Something she could feel in her bones. Maybe it was the man in the corner. Or maybe it was that crack in the ordinary, the way the light through the window caught him just right, made his silhouette sharp and strange. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't demanding anything. He was calm, observant, a different kind of presence. Esther moved between booths. She balanced 3 mugs of coffee in one hand, wiped down sticky tables, patched up a broken chair cushion with invisible stitches of apology. Her shoes squeaked. Her apron smelled faintly of grease and coffee grounds. She smiled because she had to, though her cheeks felt heavy, and her voice wished it could be quieter. She wondered, not for the first time, how much longer she could carry the weight of being invisible. Out of the kitchen burst a woman, trembling, clutching a brochure, wearing a scarf so delicate it looked fragile in that harsh fluorescent light. She spoke French, frantic, an accent thick and beautiful. Lost. Phone dead. Supposed to meet a tour group. But she had wandered confused, and now everyone in the diner spoke English only. She was adrift. Kevin, the host, scratched his head. "Table for one?" he asked. He looked at the woman like she was an alien. "You, sit anywhere." He tried, but his English stuttered. Patrons turned to watch the mess unfold. Some chuckled, some rolled their eyes. Henderson naturally leaned forward, ready to offer his horrible version of help. "Bonjour, madame," he said, voice loud. Wrong vowel, wrong tone. It sounded like he was performing rather than speaking, like he wanted applause. He gestured to a table as though choosing a pawn. The woman flinched. Esther's heart thumped. There was anger, yes, but more as something else, something alive. Something that remembered her voice in Paris. Something that whispered, "You know how to do this." Not for show, for kindness. She wiped her hands on the apron, the bleach stains and threadbare edges of it. She set down a tray, her breath shallow. She stepped toward the woman. And then she spoke. Her voice, when she spoke French, was not shy. It was precise, soft but sharp, beautiful in its imperfections. She said, "Madame, ne soyez pas inquiète. Je parle votre langue. Permettez-moi de vous aider." Silence dropped, the clutch of forks. Henderson's sneer paused. The bustle of the kitchen dulled. Heads turned. The clamor of voices folded in on itself. In that moment, the diner's ordinary noise fell away, and Esther saw something shift not only in the woman's relieved face, but up in the corner. The man with the coffee swallowed, then leaned forward, eyes curious, electric. Something in him recognizing something in her. So this was the moment. The moment that didn't belong here. A crack in the day's pattern. Nothing monumental yet, but enough. Enough to blip her heartbeat, enough to wake a dream. Something about that hush, about being heard in your own voice, about someone watching it, made the ordinary feel like an invitation. And everyone in the diner suddenly had a choice, even if they didn't know it. Stay in this messy drama of soup and complaints, or step into something unexpected. What was going on here? What would happen next? Have you ever seen someone in full daylight and felt there's more something buried deep that nobody else notices? Esther wiped the counter again. Napkin in one hand, the echo of orders in her ears. 10 hours on her feet. The tiles cold, sticky soles of her shoes complaining. The fryer spatters. The coffee machine hisses. Behind her, Henderson's voice rises. "Not medium rare. This is almost well done." She tries to smile at the date. Put in her courteous voice, the one trained to disappear, but it never reaches her eyes. Because no one here knows that 2 years ago, Esther was living in Paris. 2 years ago, she walked the wide boulevards in soft shoes, studied in overstuffed lecture halls, dreamt of being an art historian discussing Sade and Sartre with professors reading French poetry until midnight. She had notebooks full of sketches and theories. She knew museums by name, gallery openings, the smell of wet stone under ancient arches. That world felt like hers until it wasn't. Then life shifted. One phone call, her father, his voice shaking, bills mounting, the school fees gone, the scholarship lost. So she sold the good coat, moved across the ocean, found work at the Astor Diner. Here her dreams are hushed under fluorescent lights. They hide behind stained aprons. The dreams don't speak, they whisper. Esther gives customers what they expect: a polite nod, a coffee refill, a soft apology when she trips over someone's bag. She learned early that being small and quiet keeps things from breaking further. After her shift, she returns to a cramped Queens apartment she shares with Ma. The kitchen smells of instant noodles. The walls are thin. She can hear her neighbor's TV late at night. She tries not to think of the Paris wind on her face. Tries not to feel the hollow where her old life used to be. Sometimes in the mirror, she sees a trace the slant of her lips, not quite ready to smile. The look in her eyes, not dead but tired. She pulls her hair back, smooths the collar of her uniform, catches the reflection of someone who knew more about art than syrup. But out here, she is mostly invisible. Her hands, though, remember. They remember the feel of pen on paper, of clay under fingertips, the texture of museum walls. Her mind remembers debates on Fragonard's light, the color of sunrise over the Seine. She carries that in her backpack, one faded photograph tucked into a pocket. It's a snapshot of her in Paris, standing before a fountain, laughter in her eyes. Every night she pulls it out, touches its edge, but by morning her apron smells of spilled soup and old grease. The photograph returns to the pocket. She works these 10-hour days because there's no other option. She tips halfway, pretending to listen to Henderson complain. She lifts trays heavy with order slips. She bends to wipe someone's crumbs, tries not to show she swallowed her pride. She clocks out, counts the few dollars, wonders if any of it will ever matter. At night, when the din fades, she replays fragments of her past stories she once told, dreams she once had. She wonders if she spoke up, if she used her voice more often, would anyone outside of Paris notice? But until today, there were only so many chances to choose: pour more coffee, clean more tables, fold into her uniform, shrink herself smaller so the heat wouldn't burn as fiercely. And everyone assumed she was just the waitress, quiet, efficient, invisible. Yet underneath that label, Esther carried a heart that refused to settle. A mind that still remembered elegance. A voice that still trembled with French phrases her lips had learned but hadn't used in months. Nobody working at that diner saw her that way. Not the regulars who huffed about soup. Not the shift managers who passed her by, not Henderson with his demands. They saw orders, not questions. Complaints, not potential. And so she lived in the gap between who she was before and who she had become. Between a dream remembered faintly and a reality growing sharper each day. What would it take for that gap to close? What if someone noticed? Could a single sentence spoken in a language others dismiss become the spark that ignites everything? Esther was carrying 3 steaming mugs of coffee, the porcelain clinking softly against itself, when the diner door burst open. A hush followed the gust of cold air, a flipping of pages breath held. The old woman, her hands shaking, paused at the threshold. She wore a scarf in faded rose tones, gloves that looked expensive once, and eyes that held panic. The kind of panic that's louder in a foreign tongue. She held a crinkled paper map and a phone that refused to wake. There was a tour group she should have been with. The Met, the Guggenheim. She couldn't remember. Table for one, I need help, she murmured in French words, stumbling, hoping for someone who'd hear. Kevin, the host, glanced at Esther, then back to the woman. He swallowed. Table, right this way. He pointed at a booth, voice too loud, like he was broadcasting his discomfort. From the corner, the man with the gray sweater sat up straighter. He removed his glasses, wiped a speck of dust from the frame, his interest peaked. Then, as if compelled by some invisible force, Henderson, the trophy customer, cleared his throat. He stood lumbering over. Madame, I speak French. I can help you. His accent was off-theatrical, emphatic. It grated at the edges. His attempt to correct her map was sloppy. He pronounced rue wrong. He misused idioms. But he meant well, he thought. The woman twitched. Confusion in her eyes. Hesitation. Someone else had stepped in, officious, loud but wrong. Esther paused. The tray in her hand felt heavier. Her heart hammered, not from fear, but something else. Recognition. Guilt. She could have said something. She should say something. Her lips parted. The French came out not textbook but fluent. Gentle. Madame, je suis désolé pour la confusion. Mais je peux vous aider à trouver votre groupe. Soft syllables. Precise intonation. The hush around her felt absurd. She didn't know when she'd last used French aloud. Not for work, not for strangers. But this woman needed it. All at once, the diner shifted. Henderson stiffened. His mouth fell slightly open. The sound of clattering dishes dimmed. Waitresses froze mid-step. Even the ceiling's hum seemed to wane. The old woman's shoulders relaxed. Relief flooded her face, followed by tears shimmering just behind her eyelids. She nodded, nearly murmured thanks. Esther gave a gentle smile and guided her toward a table, handing her a menu in French, helping her call the tour company, translating every phrase she couldn't remember. The man in the corner watched unblinking. Not with awe, but with something else, awareness. Nobody applauded. No drama music kicked in, no spotlight. It was still a diner with vinyl booths, oil stains, neon flicker. But something invisible had changed. Esther in that moment felt the distance between herself and the apron, between the uniform she wore and the world she'd left behind, contract but not erased. Her hands shivered, not from cold, but from something she thought she had buried possibility. The air smelled like coffee and disinfectant. The woman's perfume was soft lavender. The scrape of chairs, the low murmur of voices. And in the corner, the man's cup paused halfway to his lips. That one sentence spoken in a language no one expected didn't just help a lost woman. It cracked open something in Esther, a fissure in the concrete of her routine. The diner returned to normal. Henderson stomped back to his seat, demanding bottled water. The waitress resumed wiping. The chef hollered orders. But the interruption stayed in the stillness. What if that wasn't just luck? What if someone was finally listening? Could the universe really hand you a choice you haven't dared to imagine? It was long after the dinner rush. The neon sign outside flickered and hummed. Esther was gathering trays, stacking plates, wiping her wrist from sauce streaks, already halfway into what she told herself was just another shift to survive. Then Saul from the kitchen leaned against the back doorway, debris of fry oil scent trailing behind him. He held something black, an envelope, thick mat, entirely out of place in a diner dripping with budget laminate and flickering strip lights. Esther paused in mid-step. "No one's asked for an envelope like that," Saul said, voice low. "Some guy at the corner table slipped it to me, said you should have it personally. No name. Just this." She stared at the envelope. It felt foreignly heavy in her hand. Its edges were sharp. Nothing printed. No logo. Only sealed with something like wings. A crest. Something elegant, precise, expensive. Her heart jerked. When she got home, Queens peeling walls roommate Ma buzzing with soap operas, she couldn't wait to open it. Wind rattled the windows and the city lights filtered in through smudged glass. She set the envelope on her tiny coffee table. Hands trembling just a bit, like when she touched the photograph from Paris in her wallet. Inside, wrapped in black tissue paper, there were 2 items. A card thick and heavy with silver embossing, Alexander Sterling, CEO, Sterling Innovations. And a ticket. Not coach. Not a commercial flight. Private jet. Gulfstream G650. From Teterboro, New Jersey, tomorrow at noon. Destination Paris. Name on the ticket, Esther Beaumont. And beneath it, a note in silver pen on matching black stock. "The world you're in is too small for your voice. Paris is waiting." No explanation. No schedule of meetings. No demands. Just a whisper, you belong somewhere bigger. Her breath came shallow. Thoughts tumbled in her chest like broken glass. Was this real? Was someone paying attention to her? For a moment, she wondered if Henderson had orchestrated something, some ridiculous prank. Maybe one of his friends had slipped the envelope. But none of this added up. How could he know her name, let alone send a private jet? Ma came in yawning, snagging a slice of leftover pizza crust. "What's that?" she asked. Esther held up the envelope, flicked it open, showed the card, the ticket. Ma froze, eyes wide. "This is insane," Ma said. "Private jet. Who even does this?" "It's weird, Esther." She tossed a pillow at the couch. "Isn't this how people get hurt, by believing sudden miracles?" Esther looked at the ticket, at her name printed in fine script. The jet. The cost. The sheer audacity. Somewhere in her, a childhood voice said, "Maybe this is what I've been waiting for." She turned off the lamps. Moonlight pooled on the hardwood. She thought about her uniform in the hamper, her worn jeans, the notebooks she abandoned, the French words she used only in dreams. She wondered, if I go, what happens after? If I stay, what am I leaving behind? Choice. Stay in the routine. Live small. Avoid the risk. Or jump into uncertainty, into that whisper, maybe you deserve more. She touched the edge of the photo in her wallet, the one from Paris fountain in the background, laughter in her eyes. She remembered the jacaranda trees, the smell of morning light. She'd wanted to be seen then. Not for the servers, not for the tips, for something more. Sleep came later. Her mind refused rest. Questions circled. What if it's a trap? What if I fail? What if I'm not enough? But something else softer, stronger began to bloom. What if it's true? Morning came with desperation and resolve in equal measure. Esther packed lightly, one black dress, the jeans, the sketch pad she rarely used. She left a note for Ma. If I don't come back, it's because I finally tried. She stood outside her apartment, air-cold hands clutching the envelope. The private car would come at 10 a.m. She could see neighbors gliding past in their morning routines, the bus stop, the garbage truck. They didn't know anything. Her reflection in the building's polished glass, tired shoulders. Hopeful eyes. She would leave behind the diner, the uniform, the walk of shame past Henderson's table. She would leave behind the self-doubt she wore like a second skin. But she would carry with her something fragile belief. Belief that her voice could matter. That someone did see. That perhaps destiny wasn't a myth. Standing on the curb, the car's shadow pooled. Engine idled. Door opened. She paused. Then she got in. Could a city you once called home recognize you again? Or would it betray you first? Esther stepped off the private jet into Parisian air that tasted both foreign, venu quen thuc. The sky was soft gray blue, the trees lining the tarmac whispering in early afternoon light. Nothing smelled like grease here. The sharp aroma of freshly baked bread drifted somewhere close. Suitcases rolled over cobblestones, distant laughter floated through open windows. She held her breath. Paris held her. The car glided through the arrondissements she'd known before, bright shop fronts, wrought iron balconies, facades covered in ivy. For a moment she believed she belonged here, that the echo in her mind was right. But the truth slapped her awake. She wasn't on vacation. She was on mission. At the mansion, Sterling Innovations' European wing, it smelled of polished wood and low hums of staff moving quietly. Nobody asked her to set the coffee down. They expected her to stand, to observe, to listen. Not as guest, not as tourist. As assistant. No, something more complicated. Something delicate. In the meeting room, massive windows looked onto manicured gardens, walls lined with portraits, marble tables, high ceilings. She pictured the galleries she once dreamed of curating. It felt like walking through a museum, but the stakes were more alive than art. Heritage versus profit. Legacy versus modernity. Her first assignment, sit in on discussions about acquiring Maison Lefebvre, a legendary Parisian house, famed for its leather craftsmanship, perfumes. Its workshop tradition stretching back nearly 2 centuries. To the outside world, it was beauty. To those inside, it was identity. But Esther barely understood the language of contracts, terms like due diligence, valuation, non-compete clauses, royalties, intellectual property. Numbers danced on spreadsheets. Executives talked about margins, synergies, restructuring. French lawyers spoke about cultural preservation, territorial trademarks, artisanal lineage. During one afternoon, she watched Isabel Sterling, a sharp, impeccably tailored woman, slide a report toward her. "Read this," she said, voice smooth. "What's the deal with the Lefebvre fine stitching on their signature tote? Our suppliers quote high cost." She expected a financial answer. She barely knew what stitching fees looked like. What she knew was something many executives overlooked. That stitch pattern was not just functional. It was symbolic. It told stories. It whispered of generations of hands passing the tools of women in lace in small towns, of artisans, learning from fathers and mothers, not from factories. But she bit her tongue. She nodded and tried to parse the spreadsheet. She made notes. She asked innocently, "Why is that pattern repeated across limited edition bags even when it's costly?" Some glanced at her, eyes polite, others impatient. Night fell. She stayed late, going through dossiers at her desk, reviewing images of workshops, sketches of vintage Lefebvre bags, letters from customers who wrote about visions, memories, heritage. She traced with her finger a photo of an old sewing room light, filtering through dusty windows, spools of thread lined up like soldiers, an old artisan's hand stained with dye. She felt homesick for dreams, for the girl who walked Parisian streets believing beauty could matter more than profit. But the people around her, Sterling's team, knew none of that. To them, asset value, market share, growth potential. They congratulated each other on projections. They pat themselves on the back. We'll modernize operations, reduce costs, introduce influencer campaigns. The language was slick. Global digital. It felt cold. One morning, there was a meeting with Maison Lefebvre representatives, grand dames with quiet but piercing voices, patrons of tradition smelling of leather and faint powder faces weathered by years. They spoke of legacy, of familial duty, of how the workshop had always been more than commerce. They spoke soft, but their words cut. Our heritage cannot be measured only in euros. We have a soul here, a story, hands that know how to stitch in a certain way. Esther listened. She could feel the weight of preservation pressing against the pressure of Sterling's bottom line. She felt torn. On one side, her conscience, on the other, the fear of failing, of being found unqualified. She remembered her uniform, the grease stains, the voices making demands of her in the diner. She remembered the invisibility that taught her self-doubt. And yet something inside her no longer trembled. The fear was there, yes, but shrunk, more manageable. She raised her hand unexpectedly. "Excusez-moi," she said, voice a little shaky. "I grew up in Paris. Not in this business world, but I studied art history, salons, ateliers. For the customers who buy Lefebvre, they aren't just buying a handbag, they're buying memory. They're buying story. If we lose the signature pattern, or the hand-stitched detail, or stop honoring the original dyes, we lose something no financial model can bring back." Silence followed. The executives shifted in their seats. Faces turned. Genevieve Lefebvre, sitting at the head, looked directly at her eyes, narrowing, assessing. Esther's heart rattled in her chest, but she continued. "Modernity can mean innovation. Growth can mean respect. Profit can coexist with tradition, but only if we know what tradition means." That night, sleep eluded her. She heard echoes of Henderson's demands, the diner's fluorescent harshness, the weight of the apron. She also heard the soft laughter of museums, the rustle of sketchpads. The echoing of French words she feared were lost. She walked past a full-length mirror in the mansion hallway. The dress by the entrance, elegant black, understated. She saw posture, shoulders no longer stooped, eyes no longer avoiding. She felt the tug of two worlds under her skin, the diner and the atelier, the injustice of struggle and the elegance of legacy. Paris had welcomed her back, at least it seemed so, but it was not home yet. Not until she could stand in front of both worlds and show them she belonged in both the faith of heritage and the force of ambition. Out of place sometimes, out of time maybe, but never out of purpose. Could silence be louder than every voice in the room? The conference room smelled of old leather, slick marble, and faintly of incense. Heavy drapes deadened the windows. Lights overhead glinted off polished surfaces. The table stretched like a stage with executives lined up on both sides. Papers stacked, projectors, glowing screens flashing data. Esther sat near the edge, just one of many in sleek suits. Lawyers cleared their throats. Financial analysts tapped pens. The heirs of Lefebvre shifted in their seats, aged hands gripping folders stamped with family crests. And there was Isabel Sterling, poised, disdain in her posture. Alexander Sterling sat at the head, eyes expectant. The air was thick. "Revenue projections for Q4 show a 12% decline in margin," said one expert voice, clinical. "If we ignore price compression and artisanal leather, our growth forecasts collapse." Another lawyer. "The cost of heritage. Stitching the signature pattern, the dyes fantastic from a branding standpoint, but financially untenable unless scaled down or subcontracted." An heir of Lefebvre, older man, voice stern. "We cannot compromise tradition. The stitch tells a history. The dye is part of our identity." His words echoed off marble, but some Sterling people looked at him like he was nostalgic, but naive. The numbers bled into each other. Terms flew, amortization cost overruns, economies of scale. The sterile jargon swallowed the sentimental, smothered the legacy. Esther felt her heart hammering behind ribs. She clutched her notebook, lip-bitten, palms clammy. She watched Isabel tap her high heels, watched Alexander rub his thumb over a contract. The weight of what might be lost and what might be taken pressed in hot on her throat. Then came the moment she realized all the voices but one were arguing over money. All but one were measuring value in spreadsheets. All but one were describing stuff, not soul. Esther sat still, breath shallow. She glanced at the portrait behind her, a faded painting of Madame Lefebvre's great-grandmother, standing tall, eyes soft but sharp. Hands that once held needles, thread, scissors, guided workshops, children apprentices. The painting was not perfect. The colors slightly muted, the frame chipped. But it lived. It told of hands that built something, hearts that poured into craft. Almost without decision, she stood. No request, no apology, no warning. She rose quietly, crossing the distance between being just the observer and being seen. She stepped to the painting. Her shoes clicked in silence. Heads turned. The meeting paused. Projectors dimmed. Not by technology, by collective attention. She cleared her throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, voice calm but carrying, echoing in the room like a bell. "If you strip away the stitch, the dye, the name, what are you left with? A label, yes, but is a label enough for those who wear and those who make it?" She paused. Her eyes swept the room. This is not just about profit, not just growth. It's about something that no spreadsheet can capture. The hands that know each stitch. The eyes that recognize the pattern because it reminds them of a community of legacy. Maison Lefebvre is not a product line. It's a story preserved in leather and perfume. It's the sweat of generations, the identity of people who have worked quietly without assets or margins, but with pride. Her voice shook just slightly with something more than nerves, something fierce. You talk about scaling subcontracting cost. But what about meaning? What about truth? If you lose the signature stitch, the handcrafted detail, the artisan's mark, what remains? Just something mass-produced, soulless, and easier to sell. She waited. No one interrupted. No one laughed. Just an emptiness where resistance had been expected. The heir of Lefebvre Genevieve leaned forward, her face unreadable. The Sterling lawyers exchanged glances. Isabel's pencil stopped scratching. Alexander looked at Esther with something akin to respect, maybe surprise. Then Esther spoke softer. Tradition is not an obstacle. It's a foundation. Heritage doesn't contradict progress. It anchors it. You want growth. You can have growth, but do so without erasing those who made the house what it is. Don't sell the dream. Share it. Silence stretched. The only noise was Esther's breathing steadying and the distant hum of air conditioning. The weight of truth settled. Then the heirs of Lefebvre, with voices rough with emotion, acknowledged what she said. You speak of something we have felt but couldn't say, Genevieve said. The words were small, but they broke open the barrier in the room. Esther felt something shift beneath her feet. Not trembling, but surging. A sense that she had passed a threshold, not back into invisibility, but into being someone who didn't need permission. When the meeting resumed, it was different. Terms about preserving workshops, preserving the stitch, preserving heritage as part of the contract. Compromises that once seemed impossible were now on the table. The tone warmer. The arguments softer. The lawyers used terms like legacy premium and exclusive craft instead of cost-cutting. Esther sank back into her chair, heart still loud, breath still fast, but she wasn't afraid anymore. What does it feel like when everyone's expectations finally meet what you were always capable of? The meeting room was humming with voices again, but something in Esther had shifted. There was a lightest tremor in her chest, a resolve she'd carried quietly. Today she was no longer just a witness. Alexander Sterling leaned forward, tapping a pen. Isabel's expression tight, cautious. Lawyers shuffled documents. Lefebvre family elders exchanged glances. The signature had been near collapse terms, teetering. But now the air held possibility. Esther stood not at the edge of the table, but near its center, physically and metaphorically. Before we finalize, she said, her voice clear, steady. It cut through the murmurs like a bell. Instantly the room drew in breath. She wasn't asking for an offer. She was setting terms. They had agreed in part Maison Lefebvre would maintain its traditional workshops, its artisans the signature pattern. But what Esther stepped forward to negotiate was more than preservation. She wanted partnership. She pushed back against the assumption that she would be a token inspiration story. She would not be the girl who makes people say, "Did you hear about that waitress?" She was here to build something real, not just be remembered as someone with a good story. Her ask, she wanted a stake, a small equity portion in the Lefebvre subsidiary of Sterling Innovations. To share in risk, yes, but also in triumph. She asked that her role be not as cultural liaison alone, but as project lead of integration, the one to steward heritage and modern growth together. She proposed performance-based benchmarks, double the digital presence while keeping artisanal quality intact, modern marketing that respected legacy, transparent sourcing, reinvestment in skilled workshops. The room stiffened. Isabel's jaw tightened. Mr. Lefebvre's face flashed between shock and something unspoken. But Alexander held her gaze. He had seen her from the corner from the moment she spoke French for that lost woman. He had seen her observe what others missed. He had seen value where others saw risk. After an elongated pause, the kind that feels suspended in air, he nodded. It's ambitious, he said, but not impossible. Mrs. Lefebvre, whose silence carried as much weight as any speech, leaned forward. A true voice sees what's overlooked, she said, her tone soft but heavy. She understood what Esther was asking for. Esther's chest tightened, not fear. A humming energy filled her exhilaration, relief, recognition. In that moment, Esther is no longer invisible. Her name, Esther Beaumont. They put her in the room not just as someone to observe, but someone to lead. They give her responsibility, a team, resources. Her demands aren't charity, they're investments. She watches as the contracts adjust clauses, highlighting artisan workshops, stipulations preserving pattern details, royalty for original designs, protection for legacy definitions. She hears heritage premium brand authenticity craftsmanship, paired with modern expansion, digital storytelling, global presence. And she smiles not because she's grateful, but because they see. That evening in the mansion's library lit by golden lamps, she stands at the balcony looking out at Paris. Lights on the Seine, reflections in windows. The city pulses with stories. And for the first time in years, one of those stories includes her not as a whisper, not as a footnote, but as a chapter. Alexander joins her quietly, no grand declarations. He looks at her, admiration visible. "You did more than I hoped," he says. Esther nods. "I did more than I thought possible," she replies. She didn't need applause. She doesn't need to be the waitress again. She doesn't want that title. She wants what she always deserved: respect, equity, voice, belonging. She's not invisible anymore, not to them, not to herself. What once was her burden, being unseen, has become her power. What if you stood in that same diner, under the same flickering neon light, and that moment happened to you? You'd hear the clatter of dishes, the hiss of the grill, the drained smell of grease, and you'd see her. The waitress, apron stained, voice soft, eyes tired. And then she speaks. Not for recognition, not for praise. For that lost woman. For something bigger buried in herself. Have you ever stayed silent when you knew you could speak? Ever swallowed your own voice because you thought it didn't matter? Because you believed no one would hear? Because maybe you believed you weren't the kind of person who got chance. Maybe you settled. Maybe you told yourself that opportunity is for someone else. Someone else more qualified, more polished, more visible. Maybe you believed your job is just your job, and your dreams are luxuries. But imagine this one small interruption, not a thunderbolt from heaven, just a quiet act of mercy, an untold kindness, a sentence in a language others don't expect. That small moment wakes something in you, a spark, a memory, a conviction. What if someone was watching, really watching? Seeing not the uniform, not the steam of the grill, not just the service tray, but seeing your heart, your understanding, your legacy. What if that envelope arrived in your hands instead of hers? Private jet destination, your old dream, a chance to step up beyond the apron, beyond the one more shift, beyond the "this is all I am." Would you open it? Would you trust that voice inside you that whispered once long ago, "You are more than this place"? Would you leave behind the safety of the known, your routine, your doubts, the smallness you've been taught to accept for something bigger, raw, scarier, but authentically yours? When Esther rose before that painting, she chose story over spreadsheet. She chose heritage over convenience. She didn't ask permission. She didn't need applause. She only needed to be faithful to what she knew. That beauty, tradition, identity, they are not cost centers. They are what makes something worth protecting. Today, she is no longer invisible. Today, she stands speaking from the soul of what she believed in, leading not because someone placed her, but because she claimed her place. So here's the question I leave with you. What if that person was you? What if you had the chance to move beyond the place where people see only your job, but fail to see your potential? What if you could choose dignity over concealment, voice over silence, legacy over profit, meaning over margin? What if you stepped into a flight not just across oceans, but across the threshold of what you've dared believe you deserve? You don't have to wait for a private envelope. You don't have to be asked. Sometimes the true flight is internal, the flight of self-recognition. You've already been preparing. Every time you held back, every time you helped quietly, every time you dreamed in secret, you were gathering strength. Whatever your diner, whatever your place where you feel unseen, this is your reminder. You are not your uniform. You are not your job description. You are the voice behind the tray, the mind behind the apron, the one who still remembers dreams. Because sometimes it's not about being in the right place. It's about being the right person, even when no one's watching. So if that moment came for you, would you get into the car? Would you board the plane? Would you trust that what you hold inside is enough? Here's your invitation. Turn your small moments into declarations. Speak your truth. Let your talent, your compassion, your culture be undeniable. Don't wait to be discovered. Be the one who discovers yourself. Because when you stand up and speak up even quietly, it echoes. It changes something. You become someone who no longer fades into the background, but who shapes what comes next. Thank you for being here. Thank you for letting Esther's story reach you, not just as story, but as possibility. You deserve more than you've been told. Let this be your moment.